Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku wielded Zeus's lightning as the god of thunder. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had always been a place of deafening noise and brilliant, blinding light. It was the cacophony of 100 different quirks activating in the schoolyard, the flash of a hero's signature move on the evening news, the constant, overwhelming symphony of a society built on the extraordinary. And in that symphony, he was a silent note, a rest in the measure. He was quirkless. A blank space where a miracle was supposed to be. Today, the world was muted. A persistent, slate-gray drizzle fell over Mizudafu, slicking the asphalt and casting the city in a melancholy light. The rain tapped a gentle rhythm against the window of his classroom at Aldera Junior High, a sound Izuku found strangely comforting. Unlike the explosive jeers of his classmates, or the patronizing sympathy of his teachers, the rain was impartial. It fell on everyone, hero and civilian, quirk and quirkless, with the same quiet indifference. He often found solace in storms. While others saw gloom, Izuku felt a strange sense of peace in the charged air before a downpour, a kinship with the low, distant rumble of thunder. It felt like a deep, ancient voice humming a tune only he could appreciate. It was a power he could admire without feeling the familiar, gut-wrenching pang of envy. No one owned the sky. Right, you're all third years now. The teacher droned, his voice as gray as the weather. He tossed a stack of career aptitude tests into the air with a theatrical flourish. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. But, he snatched a paper from the air, a lazy grin spreading across his face. Why bother? I know you all want to be heroes, the classroom erupted. A girl with extendable fingers wiggled them excitedly. A boy with rocky skin flexed, small pebbles falling from his arms. It was the daily pageant of the gifted, a display Izuku had witnessed thousands of times. He simply lowered his head, a small, hopeful smile on his face as he scribbled away in his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. He had already filled out his form. First choice, UA, High School Hero Course. Yes, you've all got some impressive quirks. The teacher continued, barely glancing at the chaos. But no using them in school. A sharp, barking laugh cut through the chatter. Teach! Don't lump me in with these losers, Katsuki Bakugo. Of course. He was leaning back in his chair, feet propped on his desk, the very picture of arrogant confidence. His quirk, Explosion, was as loud and volatile as his personality. He was the star of their school, the surefire future pro, and the conductor of Izuku's daily misery. I'm the real deal. The rest of these rejects will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some D-lister. I'm heading for the top. I'll ace the UA exam and become the richest, most popular hero of all time. I'll even surpass All Might. The declaration hung in the air, audacious and absolute. The teacher fumbled with his papers. Ah, Bakugo. You're aiming for UA, aren't you? Whispers filled the room. UA? The national school? Their acceptance rate is insanely low. That's exactly why it's the only place worthy of me. Bakugo roared, leaping onto his desk. Small, crackling pops of nitroglycerin sparked from his palms. I'm the only one from this garbage dump of a school who has a chance. The teacher's eyes scanned his list. Oh. Midoriya, you're trying for UA as well, aren't you? The world, which had been muted just moments before, screeched to a halt. The quiet rhythm of the rain was obliterated by a silence so profound it was a sound in itself. Then, it was broken by a wave of derisive, incredulous laughter. It crashed over Izuku, cold and sharp. Midoriya? No way, you can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. What can he even do? Izuku flinched as if struck. His face burned with a familiar, deep-seated shame. They got rid of that rule. I could be the first one. His defense was a whisper against a hurricane. An explosion slammed into his desk, sending him sprawling backward. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone filled his nostrils. Bakugo loomed over him, a predator surveying his prey, smoke wafting from his clenched fist. Deku! He snarled, the name a curse. Useless. You're worse than these rejects. You're a quirkless nobody. Do you really think you can stand in the same ring as me? Izuku scrambled back, his hands raised defensively. No! Wait, Kaken! I'm not trying to compete with you, I swear! It's been my dream since I was a kid. And, well, there's no harm in trying, right? Bakugo's crimson eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. The air crackled around him. No harm in trying? Are you taking the exam just for fun? What can you even do? The question hung in the air, unanswered because there was no answer. The bell shrieked, saving him from further torment. As students filed out, Izuku hurriedly packed his bag, his hands shaking. He just wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the rain and wash away. He reached for his notebook, his most prized possession, but Bakugo snatched it from his grasp. Hero analysis for the future. Bakugo read aloud, his voice dripping with contempt. Still playing make-believe, Deku? Give it back, Kaken! It's mine! Bakugo didn't even look at him. With a casual, cruel motion, he clapped the notebook between his palms. A sharp boom echoed through the empty classroom. The book was scorched, the pages blackened and smoking. He then tossed it carelessly out the open window. Izuku let out a small, strangled cry as it sailed through the air and landed with a soft plop in the koi pond below. You know, Bakugo said, placing a heavy, searingly hot hand on Izuku's shoulder. If you want a quirk so bad, there's a quick way to do it. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with one in your next life. The words were a physical blow. Izuku froze, his blood running cold. Bakugo and his lackeys walked away, laughing, leaving Izuku alone in the suffocating silence, the scent of smoke and rain filling the room. He stood there for a long time, trembling, a chasm of despair opening within him. He retrieved his notebook from the pond, the waterlogged pages bleeding ink like tears. The drawing of All Might on the cover was smeared, the hero's signature smile now a distorted, mocking grimace. Clutching the ruined book to his chest, Izuku began the long walk home, each step heavier than the last. Bakugo's words echoed in his head, a venomous chant. Swan dive, swan dive, swan dive. He chose a different route, hoping to avoid any further confrontation. It took him under a wide, grimy underpass, the dripping water and flickering fluorescent lights amplifying his sense of isolation. The world felt hollow, his dream a fragile, pathetic thing that had just been stomped into the mud. Maybe Kaken is right, he thought, a tear finally tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Maybe I am useless. What can I do? As if in answer, a grotesque sound bubbled up from a nearby manhole cover. A sickening, sloshing noise that made the hairs on his arms stand up. He turned, his eyes widening in terror. A monstrous creature made of green, viscous sludge was rising from the sewer, too manic, floating eyes bobbing in its semi-liquid form. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The villain gurgled, its voice a wet rasp. Its eyes fixed on Izuku. Perfect. I need to hide. Before Izuku could scream, before he could even process the danger, the sludge monster lunged. It was on him in an instant, a suffocating tsunami of filth. The sludge forced its way into his mouth, his nose, a horrifying violation that stole his breath. He clawed at the viscous body engulfing him, but his fingers just slipped through. I can't breathe. His lungs burned. Black spots danced in his vision. The villain's voice was a distorted murmur in his ear. Don't worry, kid. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then it'll all be over. This is it. I'm dying. Is this how it ends? In a dark, smelly tunnel, suffocated by a villain? His life didn't flash before his eyes. All he could see was his mother's face, her tearful apology echoing from a decade ago. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. No, somebody, help. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from the manhole cover as it was sent flying. A booming, familiar voice filled the underpass, a sound as bright and hopeful as the sun. Have no fear, you are safe. Why? Because I am here, All Might. In the flesh. His colossal frame filled the entrance of the tunnel, his smile a beacon in the gloom. The sludge villain recoiled, its eyes wide with panic. All Might? With a single, effortless motion, the #1 hero cocked back his fist. Texas smash! The punch didn't even connect. The sheer air pressure it generated was a physical force, a localized hurricane that blasted the sludge villain apart. The wind roared through the tunnel, and Izuku was freed, gasping, choking, as he fell to the hard concrete. His last conscious thought was the overwhelming relief of being saved by his idol. When he awoke, it was to a gentle, repetitive tapping on his cheek. He blinked, his vision clearing to see All Might himself, kneeling beside him. "Ah, good! Thought we lost you there," the hero boomed, his smile as brilliant as ever. Izuku scrambled upright, his mind a whirlwind of shock and awe. "All Might! Why you saved me! See, can I have your autograph?" He fumbled for his ruined notebook. All Might let out a hearty laugh. "Already did." He pointed to an open page, where his signature was scrawled in huge, bold letters. Izuku bowed so fast and so low his forehead nearly scraped the ground. "Thank you so much. It'll be a family heirloom. A national treasure, haha. You're quite the famba," All Might said, gathering the villain's scattered sludge into 2 large soda bottles. He capped them securely. "Well, I must be off. The police are waiting. Pros are always fighting time as well as villains." He crouched, preparing to leap. Panic seized Izuku. This was it. This was his one chance. The question that had defined his entire existence was on the tip of his tongue. He had to ask. He had to know. In a moment of sheer, unthinking desperation, as All Might launched himself into the air, Izuku latched onto his leg. "Whoa! Hey, kid! Let go! I love my fans, but this is a bit much!" All Might yelled, wind whipping past them as they soared over the city. "If I let go now, I'll die!" Izuku screamed, his voice thin against the gale. "Oh. Right. Good point." They landed roughly on the roof of a nearby department store. Izuku's legs felt like jelly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. All Might looked annoyed, a rare crack in his perfect heroic facade. "Look, kid. That was incredibly reckless. Just knock on the door, and someone will let you down. I really have to go." He turned to leave. "Wait." Izuku's voice was small but firm. A strange, steaming sound filled the air. All Might clutched his side. "No, I can't wait. Not now. Is it possible?" Izuku blurted out, the words tumbling from his mouth in a rush of frantic hope. "Can someone without a quirk become a hero like you? Can a quirkless person ever hope to save people?" It was the ultimate question. The one he'd been asking the world his entire life. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the answer. When he opened them, he wasn't looking at All Might. In the hero's place stood a skeletal, emaciated man, steam pouring from his body. His clothes hung loosely on his gaunt frame, and blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The iconic smile was gone, replaced by a grim, tired expression. Izuku stared, his mind refusing to connect the two images. You're not All Might! You're an imposter! A fake!" The man sighed, a rattling sound deep in his chest. He lifted his shirt to reveal a horrific, gnarled scar that covered most of his left side, a swirling vortex of ruined flesh. "I am All Might," he said, his voice now quiet and weary. "This is from a fight 5 years ago. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and I lost my entire stomach. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, this is what I look like." Izuku could only stare, horrified. The symbol of peace, the unshakable pillar of society, was broken. Frail. "You asked if you could be a hero without a power," the man, Toshinori Yagi, said, his gaze softening with a pity that felt worse than any insult. He looked out over the city, a sprawling monument to the quirk-filled society he protected. "Pro-heroes are always risking their lives. Some villains can't be beaten without a power that can match them. We're in the business of overwhelming force, of fighting fire with fire. To run into danger quirkless, that's not being a hero, kid. That's being a liability." He turned back to Izuku, his eyes filled with a sad, final certainty. "So no. I honestly don't think you can be a hero without a quirk." The words were quiet. They weren't cruel like Bakugo's. They were pragmatic, logical, and delivered with a heavy heart. And that made them 1,000 times more devastating. It was the sound of the world's greatest hero driving the final nail into the coffin of his dream. I see, Izuku whispered. The world had gone gray again. It's not wrong to dream, Toshinori added, trying to soften the blow. But you have to be realistic. If you want to help people, you could become a police officer. They get a lot of flack for not being on the front lines, but it's a fine profession. He walked to the rooftop door, his steps heavy. Just be realistic, kid. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing across the empty rooftop like a gunshot. Izuku stood there, motionless, the wind tugging at his clothes. All Might's words played over and over in his mind. Be realistic. Be realistic. Be realistic. He was right. All of them were. His mom, his teachers, Kaken, and now All Might himself. It was a consensus. He was a fool, chasing a childish fantasy in a world that had no place for it. The hope that had sustained him for 14 years finally sputtered and died, leaving a cold, hollow ache in its place. He walked numbly down the stairs, out into the city streets. He didn't know where he was going. He was just moving, an automaton on a path to nowhere. His feet, a hero fanbus feet, carried him toward the sound of a distant explosion. A crowd was gathered, their phones held high, recording the chaos. Another villain attack. He pushed his way to the front, his analyst brain kicking in out of pure, ingrained habit. A street was on fire. Pro-heroes were on the scene, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, the rookie Empty Lady, but none of them could get close. The villain was familiar. A sickening lurch twisted in Izuku's stomach. It was the sludge villain. The soda bottles must have fallen from All Might's pocket during their flight. This is my fault. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. If he hadn't latched onto All Might, if he hadn't been so selfish, so desperate, this wouldn't be happening. And then he saw it. Thrashing within the villain's slimy body, fighting for breath, was a spiky-haired boy with crimson eyes. Bakugo. Kaken was being suffocated, just as he had been. The villain was using his explosion quirk, setting the street ablaze. The heroes were helpless. Kamui couldn't act with the fire everywhere. Death Arms lacked the range. Empty Lady was too big for the narrow street. They were standing by, waiting for a hero with the right quirk. Izuku watched, frozen. He saw Bakugo's eyes. For a split second, they met his. In them, he didn't see the arrogant bully who had tormented him his whole life. He saw terror. He saw desperation. He saw a person who needed saving, and something inside Izuku Midoriya snapped. All Might's voice echoed in his head. You can't be a hero, Bakugo's sneer. Take a swan dive off the roof, the world's cold, hard logic. Be realistic. His legs moved. They moved before he could think, before he could rationalize, before he could remember that he was quirkless and useless. He broke through the police barrier, a frantic, skinny kid running toward a monster. Idiot! Get back here! Death Arms yelled. He couldn't stop. His mind raced, flicking through the pages of his analysis. The villain's eyes. They're solid. That must be his weak point. He unslung his backpack and hurled it. A binder flew out, its corner striking the villain directly in the eye. The monster roared in pain, its grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Bakugo was able to gasp for air. Deku! What the hell are you doing here? He choked out. I don't know. Izuku screamed back, clawing desperately at the sludge, trying to free his childhood friend, his tormentor. My legs just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. He met Bakugo's shocked gaze, a frantic, tearful smile on his face. You looked like you needed help. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated heroism. An act of selfless, reckless courage that defied all logic. It was also the moment the sky broke. The drizzle had stopped some time ago, but the sky had remained a thick, oppressive blanket of gray. Now, that blanket began to churn. The clouds swirled, darkening from gray to a bruised, angry purple. The change was unnaturally fast, a time-lapse video of a brewing tempest. The air grew heavy, thick with a charge that made the hair on everyone's arms stand on end. A low, guttural rumble echoed from the heavens, not the distant, comforting sound from Izuku's classroom, but a deep, predatory growl. The temperature plummeted. The smell of ozone, sharp and clean, cut through the smoke. The sludge villain paused, its attention drawn by the sudden, bizarre atmospheric shift. What the? Izuku felt it first. A hum deep in his bones. A power that was not his own, yet felt as familiar as his own heartbeat. The anxiety, the guilt, the righteous fury at his own powerlessness, and the desperate, all-consuming need to save, it all coalesced into a single, incandescent point of emotional energy. It was a prayer screamed into the void, and the void answered. A flash of impossible, blinding white light. A sound that was not a sound, but the very tearing of the firmament. A pillar of raw, celestial energy descended from the heart of the newborn storm and struck Izuku mid-area. Time seemed to stutter. For the hundreds of onlookers, it was a terrifying, incomprehensible event. One moment, a quirkless kid was trying to save his bully. The next, he was the epicenter of a divine cataclysm. The lightning bolt was not a jagged, chaotic fork, but a straight, perfect column of power, as if hurled by an unseen, cosmic hand. It struck Izuku directly in the back. People screamed, expecting to see a charred corpse. The heroes braced for the worst. Bakugo, his vision widened out, felt the energy wash over him, but Izuku did not burn. He did not scream. He did not die. He absorbed it. The light receded, and he was still standing. His cheap, yellow backpack was incinerated, his school uniform singed, but he was unharmed. He stood straight, his head bowed. When he lifted it, his eyes were no longer a gentle, unassuming green. They were a brilliant, terrifying electric blue, glowing with an inner light. Arcs of white and gold lightning danced across his skin, weaving over his arms and shoulders like living tattoos. The air around him crackled and hissed with raw power. The fear and panic were gone from his face, replaced by a look of serene, absolute focus. He was no longer a boy. He was a conduit. From the crowd, Toshinori Yagi, in his withered form, watched the entire scene unfold. He had been shamed into action by the boy's courage, but he had been too late. He was preparing to transform and intervene when the sky had turned. Now, he could only stare, his jaw hanging open, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He had witnessed thousands of quirks. He had fought a man who could steal and wield hundreds of them. But this was not a quirk. This was something else. Something ancient. Something elemental. Something divine. The sludge villain, recoiling from the sheer energy radiating from the boy, let out a gurgle of fear and rage. "What are you?" Izuku didn't answer with words. The dormant instinct of a king, a god of the sky, guided him. He felt the power thrumming within him, an ocean of energy where before there had been only a desert. He knew, with a certainty that transcended thought, what to do. He raised his right hand, his fingers outstretched. The gesture was calm, deliberate, and held an authority that was utterly alien to the stuttering, nervous boy he had been moments before. A sphere of crackling, white-hot energy coalesced in his palm, humming with restrained power. "Get away from him!" he commanded. His voice was different. It was his own, but it was layered with another, an echoing, resonant baritone that spoke with the authority of thunder itself. With a final, desperate lunge, the villain surged forward, intending to engulf both boys. Izuku thrust his hand forward. It was not a wild blast. It was not an uncontrolled explosion. It was a precise, concentrated spear of pure lightning. A river of white and gold energy erupted from his palm, striking the sludge villain dead center. The creature didn't even have time to scream. Its semi-liquid body was instantly superheated, the electricity coursing through it and disrupting its molecular cohesion. It spasmed violently for a second before its body dissolved into a steaming, non-toxic puddle on the scorched asphalt. The lightning had been so perfectly controlled that Bakugo, who was still at the epicenter, was completely unharmed. He was simply free. He fell to his knees, coughing, gasping for breath, the smell of ozone and cooked sludge filling his senses. He looked up, his crimson eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief, at the boy standing over him. Deku. Useless, quirkless Deku. The light in Izuku's eyes flickered. The arcs of lightning dancing on his skin sputtered and died. The immense, ancient presence that had filled him receded, leaving an echoing void in its wake. The adrenaline, the divine power, the sheer force of will, it all drained out of him at once. The strain of channeling a power meant for a god was too much for his mortal, 14-year-old body. His knees buckled. He swayed for a moment, his electric blue eyes fading back to their normal, soft green. He looked down at his trembling hands, then at the smoking puddle on the ground, and finally at a stunned and terrified Bakugo. Kaken, he whispered, his own voice sounding foreign to him, and then he collapsed, pitching forward onto the street in a dead faint. For a long moment, there was only silence. A profound, stunned silence broken only by the crackle of the nearby fires and the soft, gentle patter of a newly started rain, as if the sky itself was weeping in relief. The crowd was speechless. The pro-heroes stood frozen, their own quirks feeling like children's party tricks in the face of what they had just witnessed. In the back of the crowd, Toshinori Yagi stared at the unconscious boy, his mind reeling. He had just told that child he couldn't be a hero, and that child had then proceeded to do something that not even he, in his prime, could have done. He hadn't just defeated a villain. He had commanded the heavens. The symbol of peace felt a tremor of something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fear. It was awe. And he realized, with a shocking, world-altering clarity, that he hadn't just made a mistake. He had witnessed an impossibility. The world had a new kind of storm, and its name was Izuku Midoriya. Izuku's return to consciousness was a slow, fractured affair. It began not with sight or sound, but with a scent, antiseptic and sterile, a stark contrast to the ozone and burnt sludge that had been his last sensory input. A low, persistent beeping kept a steady rhythm somewhere to his left. He felt a soft blanket over him, the fabric unfamiliar. He peeled his eyes open, wincing as the harsh fluorescent light of the room assaulted them. He wasn't in a hospital. The walls were a drab, official gray, and the single window was barred. He was in an infirmary, likely within a police station. His memories came rushing back in a chaotic tidal wave, the sludge villain, Kaken's terrified eyes, the desperate, unthinking charge, and then, the light. The power. The feeling of an entire storm being contained within his own fragile body. He sat up with a gasp, his hands flying to his chest, half expecting to find it charred and broken. But there was nothing. No pain, no burns, only a strange, lingering hum deep in his bones, like the ghost of a plucked cello string. Easy there, son. You've been out for a few hours. A man in a tan trench coat sat on a chair in the corner of the room, his expression calm and unreadable. Izuku recognized him from news reports, Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. His quirk was human lie detector. Detective! Izuku's voice was hoarse. What happened? Is Kaken okay? Is everyone is fine, Tsukachi said, his voice reassuring. He gestured to a glass of water on the bedside table. Your friend Bakugo has a few scrapes and some minor smoke inhalation, but he's perfectly healthy. The other heroes and civilians were unharmed. Thanks to you. The last two words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken questions. Izuku took a sip of water, his hand trembling. I don't understand what happened. One minute I was trying to pull Kaken free, and the next. He trailed off, the memory a blur of impossible power. The next, you summoned a lightning bolt from a spontaneously formed cumulonimbus cloud and disintegrated a villain with a focused electrical discharge estimated in the low pterodactyl range. Tsukachi finished, reading flatly from a notepad. He looked up, his gaze intense. The official report is being filed as a sudden quirk manifestation under extreme duress, combined with a localized freak weather phenomenon. Unofficially, no one has a clue what they just saw. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Midoriya, I need you to be completely honest with me. My quirk lets me know if you're lying. Did you know you had this power? Izuku shook his head, his eyes wide and earnest. No. I swear. I'm quirkless. I was diagnosed when I was 4. I've never done anything like this before in my life. I don't know how I did it. A beat of silence. Tsukachi's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, confusion, perhaps awe, passed through his eyes. He's telling the truth, he murmured to himself. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The energy readings we got from the site were astronomical. They don't match any registered electrical quirk on the planet. The atmospheric pressure drop was equally inexplicable. It broke all known models for meteorological science and quirk theory. Izuku shrank under the weight of his words. He hadn't just manifested a quirk, he had broken the rules of the world. He was an anomaly, a terrifying glitch in the system. The door opened, and his mother, Inko, rushed in, her face a mess of tears and frantic relief. Izuku! Oh, my baby! She threw her arms around him, holding him so tightly he could barely breathe. I was so worried! They called me, they said there was an incident, a villain, and then they said you had a quirk, a powerful one, and then they showed me the video. She pulled back, her hands framing his face, her eyes searching him for any sign of injury. Her relief was quickly being replaced by a deep, trembling fear. Izuku, what was that? That power, it was terrifying. He had no answer for her. He could only hug her back, the silent hum in his bones feeling less like a ghost and more like a caged beast. He was questioned further, but he had no new information to give. Eventually, they were allowed to leave. As they walked through the station, they passed an open doorway. Inside, Katsuki Bakugo was being praised by a group of pro-heroes. Such tenacity! A powerful quirk and the will to match. You'll be a great hero one day, kid! Bakugo wasn't preening or boasting as he normally would. He was silent, his fists clenched, his gaze fixed on the floor. He seemed to feel Izuku's presence, and looked up. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Izuku saw no anger, no gratitude. He saw a deep, unsettling confusion and something else, a sliver of raw, undiluted fear. Bakugo, the boy who feared nothing, was afraid of him. He quickly looked away, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The chasm between them had just become infinitely wider. The walk home was a blur. The world seemed to hold its breath around Izuku. People on the street would glance at him, then at their phones, then back at him, their whispers following him like a shroud. The footage was already everywhere. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless kid. He was the Lightning Boy. A viral sensation, a mystery to be debated and dissected by online forums and news anchors. That evening, a knock came at their apartment door. Inko, still flustered and anxious, opened it to reveal the skeletal, gaunt form of Toshinori Yagi. All Might, she whispered, recognizing him from Izuku's fanboy ramblings about his true form. Good evening, Mrs. Midoriya, Toshinori said with a slight, respectful bow. May I have a word with your son? It's important. They sat in the quiet of the living room, the air thick with tension. Inko served tea with trembling hands before retreating to the kitchen, leaving them alone but remaining within earshot. Toshinori took a long sip before speaking, his eyes filled with a gravity Izuku had never seen before. Young Midoriya, I came here tonight to say two things. First, and most importantly, I was wrong. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. What you did today, it was reckless, insane, and defied every piece of advice I gave you. Toshinori continued, his voice laced with a profound, weary sincerity. It was also the most heroic thing I have ever seen. You, a boy who believed himself to be quirkless, with no thought for his own safety, ran into a situation that had paralyzed seasoned pros. You did it because you saw someone in need of saving. You acted like a true hero before you ever had a power. He bowed his head low, a gesture of deep, humbling respect. I apologize for what I said on that rooftop. I was a fool. Izuku was speechless, tears welling in his eyes. The validation he had craved his entire life was being given to him by his idol, but it felt hollow, overshadowed by the terrifying power that had earned it. The second thing, Toshinori said, his expression turning serious, is about what happened next. That power. Izuku, what you wield is not a quirk. Izuku nodded slowly. Aizawa-sensei at Yui tried his erasure on me. It didn't work. The detective said the same thing. But if it's not a quirk, what is it? I don't know, Toshinori admitted, the confession seeming to pain him. I have fought against a man who has lived for over a century, Who has seen and stolen countless quirks? I have seen the very pinnacle of what human evolution can produce. What you did was not that. It felt primordial. Like a force of nature given a human form. It is ancient, powerful, and frighteningly dangerous. He leaned forward, his gaze locking with Izuku's. I cannot offer you my power. What I have is a sacred torch, meant to be passed on. But you are already carrying a divine fire, a fire that could scorch the entire world if left untended. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. So I will offer you something else. I cannot teach you how to use that power. I don't think any living person can. But I can teach you how to be the kind of man worthy of wielding it. I can teach you control, restraint, and wisdom. I will mentor you, young Midoriya. I will help you learn to carry the weight of the heavens you now hold in your hands. The offer was staggering. It wasn't the dream he had always envisioned, inheriting the power of his idol. It was something far more terrifying and profound. He wasn't being asked to follow a legacy. He was being asked to forge a new one. His gaze drifted to his All Might poster on the wall, the hero's signature smile beaming down. He had always wanted to be just like him. But now he had to be something else. He looked at the man before him, the frail, mortal shell of the symbol of peace, and then looked down at his own hands, which had, for a few brief moments, channeled the wrath of a god. Okay, Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady. I accept. The next 10 months were a baptism by fire, or more accurately, by lightning. Toshinori explained that training in a city was out of the question. The risk of collateral damage was too high. Instead, he arranged for them to use a remote, privately owned mountain range on the coast of the Shizuoka prefecture. It was a wild, untamed place of jagged, granite peaks that clawed at the sky, where the wind never stopped howling and storms brewed with startling ferocity. It was the perfect crucible. Every day after school and all through the weekends, Izuku would make the journey. The first month had nothing to do with his power. It was pure, grueling, physical conditioning. Your body is the vessel, my boy! Toshinori would bark, in a voice that was a pale imitation of his all-might boom but still carried authority. That power you channeled put an immense strain on you. You were lucky to have only fainted. If you are to wield a god's power, you must first have the constitution of a mortal hero. So Izuku ran. He ran up mountain trails until his lungs burned and his legs screamed. He did push-ups on rocky ledges with the wind threatening to tear him away. He hauled rusted scraps of metal and abandoned equipment left over from a defunct mining operation, his muscles tearing and rebuilding, growing stronger, denser. He wasn't just clearing a beach. He was fortifying the dam that was holding back an ocean of unimaginable energy. It was during the second month that he began to truly understand the nature of his power. It wasn't a tool he could simply pick up and use. It was a part of him, inextricably linked to the one thing he had never learned to control, his emotions. Their first breakthrough came on a frustrating afternoon. He was supposed to be focusing, trying to summon even a single spark into his palm, but his mind was a whirlwind of anxiety. The UA entrance exam was looming. His progress felt slow, and the memory of Bakugo's fearful gaze haunted him. I can't do it, All Might! Nothing's happening, he said, his voice tight with panic. Calm yourself, young Midoriya, Toshinori advised from a safe distance. The power responds to your will, not your desperation. But I am willing it, Izuku insisted, clenching his fists. As his frustration mounted, the air around him began to prickle and buzz. The loose pebbles around his feet levitated an inch off the ground, dancing in an unseen electrical field. The fillings in Toshinori's teeth began to ache. My boy, look at your hands, Toshinori said gently. Izuku looked down. Tiny, furious arcs of blue electricity were snapping between his knuckles, like a swarm of angry hornets. He hadn't even realized it was happening. As soon as he focused on them, his anxiety spiked further, and the arcs grew larger, more violent. This is what I mean, Toshinori explained. Your anxiety is creating a chaotic, uncontrolled static field. You are not commanding the storm, you are becoming it. You must find your center, you must be the eye of the hurricane. From then on, their training shifted. Alongside the physical regimen, Toshinori taught him meditation. They would sit for hours on a high peak, the wind whipping around them, as Izuku learned to quiet the frantic, analytical monologue in his head. He learned to breathe, to feel the flow of his emotions not as a chaotic flood, but as a current he could observe and guide. Slowly, patterns emerged. A deep sense of sadness or melancholy would cause the air to cool, a light mist or drizzle forming around him, even on a sunny day. A flash of anger, like when he recalled Bakugo's words on that fateful day, would cause a distant, ominous rumble of thunder to echo through the valleys. Joy, pure and simple, manifested as a harmless, beautiful shimmer of what looked like St. Elmo's fire dancing on his fingertips. His body had become a barometer for his soul. With this understanding came the first true steps of control. He started small. Tashinori brought him a box of dead batteries and a simple lantern. For a week, Izuku's sole task was to make the lantern light up. He would sit, holding the lantern, closing his eyes, and focusing not on the grand, terrifying power of the lightning strike, but on a single, gentle thought light. He imagined a steady, warm flow of energy, not a cataclysmic blast. On the 5th day, after hours of focused meditation, it happened. A soft, golden spark flowed from his index finger, down the wire, and into the bulb. The lantern flickered to life with a warm, steady glow. Izuku's gasp of delight was so pure that the light momentarily flared, almost blindingly bright, before he reined it in. He had done it. He had tamed a single, tiny drop from the ocean of his power. As his control grew, he began to notice something else. A whisper in the back of his mind. It wasn't a voice with words. It was an instinct, an ancient, primal sense of knowing. When he tried to move the electricity, this instinct would guide him, showing him the path of least resistance, the most efficient way to channel the current. It felt like muscle memory for a muscle he never knew he had. Tashinori theorized it was the dormant will of whatever entity's power he now possessed. A remnant of the original consciousness, guiding its new host. To Izuku, it felt like listening to the rhythm of the storm itself. By the 6-month mark, he could consistently charge batteries, power small electronics, and even generate enough controlled heat to start a campfire. He learned to magnetize objects, pulling his discarded metal weights toward him with a flick of his wrist. He learned to ionize the air in a path in front of him, allowing him to dash short distances in a near-instant blur of blue light, the displaced air cracking like a whip behind him. His physical transformation was just as dramatic. The scrawny, hunched boy was gone. 10 months of grueling labor had forged a lean, powerful physique. He was still not a giant like All Might, but his body was a tightly coiled spring, etched with the kind of functional muscle that spoke of real strength, not just aesthetic bulk. He moved with a new confidence, a quiet grace that was worlds away from his former nervous stumbling. On the final week before the UA exam, the biggest storm of the year rolled in from the coast. The sky turned a bruised black, the wind shrieked like a banshee, and rain fell in thick, horizontal sheets. Tashinori, huddled under a rocky overhang, thought about calling off training for the day, but Izuku walked out into the heart of it. He climbed to the highest, most exposed peak, the place where lightning was most likely to strike. He stood there, his clothes plastered to his body, his green hair darkened by the rain, and closed his eyes. He didn't try to stop the storm. He didn't try to fight it. He simply reached out to it. With his senses, with his power, with his very soul. He felt the colossal buildup of static electricity in the clouds above, the intricate dance of positive and negative charges. He felt the raw, untamed fury of the wind and the percussive impact of the rain. It did not feel alien or hostile. It felt like home. A bolt of lightning, thicker than a tree trunk, forked down from the sky, aimed directly at the peak where he stood. Tashinori's heart leaped into his throat. Izuku's eyes snapped open, glowing with that same electric blue light from 10 months ago, but this time it was calm, controlled. He didn't move a muscle. He simply willed it. The lightning, a mere 50 feet from striking him, seemed to hesitate. Its path bent, shifting impossibly in midair, and it slammed into a granite boulder 20 feet to his left, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Izuku stood untouched, the master of the storm not through domination, but through understanding. He was the eye of the hurricane, the calm at the center of the beautiful, terrifying chaos. He walked back to Tashinori, the rain seeming to part slightly around him. The immense power was still there, a quiet aura of static that was now a permanent part of him, but it was at peace. Tashinori looked at the boy before him. The journey wasn't over, it had barely begun. But the foundation was laid. The vessel was forged. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya, the fanda. He was no longer the lightning boy from the viral videos. He was something new. He had faced a force of nature and learned not to conquer it, but to harmonize with it. "I think you're ready, my boy," Tashinori said, a proud, genuine smile gracing his thin features. Izuku looked out at the raging sea and the flashing sky, then down at his own steady hands. The weight of the heavens was still there, a constant pressure on his soul. But it was no longer a crushing burden, it was a mantle. And he was finally ready to learn how to wear it. His dream was no longer just to be a hero, it was to prove that even a power that could shatter mountains could be used to protect the smallest, most fragile of lives. He was going to Yue not just to save people, but to control a storm, the greatest storm of all, the one inside himself. The gates of Yue High School were less an entrance, and more a statement. They towered over the street, a colossal U and forming an archway that seemed to scrape the sky. For most aspiring heroes, this view was the culmination of a lifelong dream, a threshold to greatness that inspired a cocktail of terror and elation. 10 months ago, Izuku Midoriya would have been a trembling, hyperventilating mess before them, his spirit shrinking under the sheer weight of the institution's legacy. Today, he was calm. He stood on the pavement, his new yellow backpack slung comfortably over his shoulders, and simply looked. He wasn't overwhelmed. He felt a quiet resonance with the scale of the place, a sense that he belonged not because of a desperate dream, but because of the reality of what he now was. The power within him, the sleeping giant he had spent nearly a year learning to soothe, seemed to hum in quiet approval. The air around him held a faint, almost imperceptible charge, the taste of ozone on the back of his tongue a constant companion. He had walked this path 1,000 times in his daydreams, a quirkless nobody fantasizing about a miracle. Now, he walked it for real, a living storm in a school uniform, his purpose clear. This exam was not a desperate gamble for a chance. It was the first true test of his control. "Out of my way, Deku," the voice, a familiar gravelly rasp, cut through his concentration. Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, not even bothering to look at him, his shoulders squared with a tension that went beyond his usual abrasive arrogance. It was the rigid posture of a person trying to ignore something that terrified them. Izuku simply stepped aside, his gaze steady. He felt a pang of something complex, not fear, not anymore, but a sad, lingering echo of a friendship that had curdled into something toxic. "You're going to trip," Izuku said, his voice even. Bakugo, who had been marching forward with blind fury, stumbled over a slightly raised paving stone. He caught himself before he fell, whirling around, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "Were you trying to mock me?" he snarled, small pops already crackling in his palms. Before Izuku could respond, a hand chopped down in the space between them. "Cease this confrontation at once. We are standing on the hallowed grounds of Japan's premier hero academy. We should conduct ourselves with the utmost solemnity." The speaker was a tall, broad-shouldered boy with dark blue hair and glasses. He moved with a crisp, robotic precision that identified him as an elite from a mile away. Izuku recognized him from the news as a member of the esteemed Ida family. The Ida scion turned his stern gaze on Izuku. "And you? You noticed the potential hazard in the pavement, did you not? Your powers of observation are commendable. You have a true heroic spirit." Izuku, caught off guard by the abrupt shift from admonishment to praise, could only offer a small, slightly bewildered smile. "Oh. Thank you." Bakugo just glared at both of them, a low growl rumbling in his chest, before turning and stalking away, his anger a palpable force field around him. The storm inside Bakugo was loud and explosive. The storm inside Izuku was quiet and waiting. The written portion of the exam was first. It was a marathon of logic puzzles, advanced mathematics, literature, and ethical quandaries. Izuku moved through it with the same quiet focus he had applied to his training. His mind, honed by years of obsessive hero analysis, and now sharpened by months of meditative discipline, was a finely tuned instrument. He finished with time to spare, the hum in his bones a steady, reassuring presence. Next came the orientation. All the hero course applicants were herded into a vast, dark auditorium. The lights suddenly flared to life, illuminating a massive stage where the voice hero, Present Mike, stood behind a podium, his signature grin splitting his face. "Welcome, little listeners, to today's live performance!" he screamed, his voice amplified to a level that shook the seats. "Can I get a yeah?" Silence. A vast, echoing silence filled with the nervous energy of hundreds of teenagers. Izuku didn't even flinch at the volume. He had stood on a mountaintop while thunder cracked the sky open directly overhead. A sonic quirk was just noise. He pulled out a small notebook, Hero Analysis No. 14, and began to take notes, his focus absolute. "Tough crowd," Present Mike continued undeterred. "Well, let's get right to it. We'll be running a 10-minute mock battle in a super hip urban setting. You can bring whatever gadgets and gear you want. After the presentation, you'll head to your specified battle center." On the massive screen behind him, a video game-style graphic displayed 4 silhouettes of robots. "There are 3 types of foe villains in every battle center. You'll earn points for each one you defeat, based on their difficulty level. Your goal, listeners, is to use your quirks to rack up a heroic score. But watch out, attacking other examinees is a big no-no, you dig?" As Present Mike spoke, Izuku's analytical mind was already working. 3 villain types. Variable points. A dense urban environment. This isn't just a test of power, it's a test of efficiency and situational awareness. He wasn't thinking about how many he could destroy. He was thinking about how he could disable the maximum number in the minimum amount of time with the least amount of collateral damage. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. That was what All Might had taught him. Restraint. Control. "Excuse me. May I ask a question?" A spotlight hit the Ida boy from the entrance, who had shot to his feet, his hand raised ramrod straight. "Hit me. On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. Not 3. If this is a misprint on official UA materials, it is a great shame. We are all here today because we seek to be molded into exemplary heroes." He then whirled around, pointing a rigid finger directly at Izuku. "And you, with the curly hair, you have been muttering and scribbling this entire time. It is distracting. If you think this is some kind of game, then I suggest you leave immediately." A few students snickered. Izuku simply blinked, looking down at his notebook, and then back up at the imposing figure. The old Izuku would have stammered, apologized profusely, and probably burst into tears. The new Izuku simply closed his notebook and offered a calm, steady look. "I apologize if my focus was a distraction," he said, his voice quiet but clear, carrying easily through the auditorium. There was no fear in it, no shame. Only a simple statement of fact. The Ida boy was taken aback by the direct, unflustered response. Before he could retort, Present Mike cut in. All right, Examinee 7111. Thanks for the great question. The 4th villain type is an arena trap. It's worth 0 points. Think of it as a gimmick, a giant obstacle to be avoided. I recommend you listeners steer clear." Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly. 0 points. An obstacle. No. His training with Tashinori had taught him to see the whole board. Nothing in a test this refined was without purpose. The 0-pointer wasn't an obstacle. It was a test of something else entirely: judgment, prudence, and maybe, just maybe, a different kind of heroism. He was assigned to Battle Center B. As he boarded the bus, he found a seat by the window and closed his eyes, centering himself. He could feel the anxious energy of the other students, a chaotic buzz in the air. He filtered it out, focusing on the steady, rhythmic hum within his own body. He was the eye of the storm. Excuse me?" He opened his eyes. A girl with a round, friendly face and a permanent blush on her cheeks was standing in the aisle, looking down at him with a bright, nervous smile. "I just wanted to say thank you for earlier," she said, her voice cheerful. "You caught that guy's attention when he was yelling at you, and it totally stopped me from freaking out. I've been a nervous wreck all morning." Izuku recognized her. She was the one he'd passed on the way in, just after his encounter with Bakugo. She had tripped on the same paving stone, and he'd seen a kind-looking girl in the crowd use her quirk to make her float before she hit the ground. That must have been her. Oh, it was nothing, he said with a small smile. He seemed passionate. Yeah, that's one word for it, she giggled. I'm Uraraka Achiko. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya Izuku. Likewise. The exchange was simple, normal. For the first time in his life, he was having a casual conversation with a peer before a test without a crippling sense of inadequacy. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The bus arrived at Battle Center B. It was a sprawling, meticulously constructed cityscape, complete with skyscrapers, power lines, and alleyways. It was a perfect playground. As the students gathered before the massive gates, Izuku stretched, feeling the latent power flow through his limbs. He could feel the entire electrical grid of the mock city, a faint web of energy that he could sense, touch, and if he so chose, command. Present mixed voice boomed from unseen speakers. All right, listeners! The test begins. Now! A moment of confused silence passed through the crowd. What are you waiting for? There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! 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 The gates flew open. While the other students were still processing the command, Izuku was already moving. He ionized the air in a 30-foot path before him and, in a blink, discharged a tiny fraction of his energy. He didn't run, he arrived. He vanished from the starting line in a blur of blue-white light, the sharp crack of displaced air echoing behind him, leaving a stunned crowd in his wake. He was the first one into the city. He rounded a corner and came face to face with a one-point robot, a squat, green machine on tank treads. It swiveled its single red eye toward him, its machine gun arms spinning up. Izuku didn't even break his stride. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the robot's metal chassis as he zipped past. He sent a single, precise jolt of electricity, not a destructive blast, but a targeted electromagnetic pulse, directly into its central processor. The robot's red eye flickered and died. It coasted to a halt, completely inert, its systems fried from the inside out. 1 point. He flowed through the streets like a current. A pair of 2-pointers emerged from an alleyway. Before they could fire, Izuku leaped, using the metal fire escape on a nearby building as a magnetic anchor to pull himself upward. He landed on a rooftop, then sent 2 smaller, controlled electrical arcs down, striking both robots on the exposed power couplings on their necks. They sparked, seized up, and collapsed. 5 points. His movements were a mixture of analysis and instinct. The dormant, ancient consciousness within him guided his power, showing him the weaknesses in the machines, the flow of their internal circuitry. He moved with a speed and grace that was breathtaking, a phantom of blue light disabling machines with surgical precision. He wasn't just focused on his own score. His senses, now attuned to the electromagnetic spectrum, gave him an unparalleled awareness of the battlefield. He could feel the metallic signatures of the robots, and the bioelectric fields of the other students. When a 3-pointer with rocket launchers cornered a boy with a hardening quirk, Izuku, from a block away, created a powerful magnetic field that wrenched a manhole cover from the street and sent it flying like a shield, intercepting the rockets mid-flight. He didn't even stop, already moving toward his next target. He was racking up rescue points without even trying. It was simply the most efficient way to protect the other combatants. He saw Uraraka again. She was doing well, using her zero-gravity quirk to make the robots float before letting them crash back to the ground. But she was cornered by a group of 4 heavily armored 2-pointers. They were closing in, their pincer-like arms snapping. Before she could be overwhelmed, a flash of blue light appeared between her and the machines. It was Izuku. He didn't even look at her. He simply planted his feet, extended his hands, and unleashed a wide, non-lethal arc of electricity that chained between the 4 robots. They convulsed, their systems shorting out in a shower of sparks, and collapsed into a heap of twitching metal. He gave her a quick, reassuring nod. "Be careful," he said before vanishing again in another lightning-quick dash, the air cracking in his wake. Uraraka stared at the spot where he had been, her mouth agape. Whoa! In the UE observation room, a wall of monitors displayed feeds from every battle center. A group of pro-heroes, including the principal, Nizu, and a tired-looking Shota Aizawa, watched the proceedings. This year's batch looks promising, one of the teachers remarked. That kid with the explosions in Battle Center A is racking up points like crazy, though his methods are a bit destructive. Indeed, said Nizu, his beady eyes gleaming with intelligence as he sipped his tea. But my attention is drawn elsewhere. He tapped a button, and the main screen switched to a feed from Battle Center B, following a single, elusive figure. On the screen, Izuku Midoriya was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. He disabled a three-pointer by magnetizing the lampposts around it, pinning it in place before shorting it out. He saved another examinee from a falling piece of debris by creating a powerful updraft of ionized air to cushion its fall. Aizawa leaned forward, his usual bored expression replaced by one of intense, critical scrutiny. His quirk is some form of electricity generation and manipulation, but his application is flawless. His speed, his precision, his situational awareness. He's not fighting like a kid trying to pass a test. He's operating like a seasoned pro. He's at 67 villain points and 45 rescue points already. Another teacher noted, his voice filled with disbelief. His score is astronomical. All Might, in his skeletal form, stood in the back of the room, a small, proud smile on his face that he tried to hide behind a cough. You've learned the lesson well, my boy, he thought. The scalpel, not the sledgehammer. And then the ground began to shake. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the city, growing louder and louder. Dust and debris rained down from the tops of the buildings. From behind the tallest skyscraper, a shadow fell over the entire battle center. The zero-pointer. It was a Goliath, a monster of green metal and black plating that was taller than any building in the city. Its arms were the size of buses, its single red eye a glowing, malevolent sun. It moved with a slow, inexorable purpose, its massive fists smashing through buildings as if they were made of cardboard. The effect was instantaneous. The confident, competitive energy of the exam evaporated, replaced by pure, primal fear. It's the zero-pointer! Someone screamed. Run! It's insane to fight that thing! A wave of students turned and fled, a panic stampede heading for the exit. It was the logical choice, the one President Mike had all but ordered them to make. Izuku was about to disengage as well. His mission was to score points and demonstrate control, not to fight an unwinnable battle against a pointless obstacle. But then he heard a small, pained cry. He scanned the area, his enhanced senses cutting through the chaos. There, not 30 yards from the zero-pointer's path, was Uraraka. She was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a huge slab of concrete dislodged by the robot's emergence. She was struggling, her face pale with pain and fear, as the Titan's colossal shadow fell over her. The other students ran past her, their own survival their only concern. The pro-heroes in the observation room watched, their faces grim. This was part of the test, to see how they reacted under true pressure. For Izuku, time seemed to slow to a crawl. He saw her trapped form. He saw the robot raising its massive fist for another ground-shaking smash, this one aimed right for her. He heard All Might's voice in his head, a constant mantra for the last 10 months. Control. Restraint. Be the eye of the storm. But he also heard his own voice, screaming in an underpass as he clawed uselessly at a sludge villain. You looked like you needed help. The scalpel was no longer the right tool. The situation called for a sledgehammer. No, it called for something more. It called for the thunder. There was no hesitation. No flicker of doubt. His decision was instantaneous. He stopped running away from the robot and turned to face it. The other fleeing students barely registered his change in direction. He planted his feet on the broken asphalt, his expression shifting from one of focused calm to one of absolute, unshakable resolve. The sky above Battle Center B, which had been a clear, late-morning blue, began to change. It started subtly. A single, dark cloud seemed to coalesce out of nowhere directly above the cityscape. Then another, and another. They swirled together, drawn by an invisible force, forming a rapidly darkening vortex. The wind picked up, howling through the artificial canyons of the city. The temperature dropped by 20 degrees in 10 seconds. A palpable, oppressive weight settled over the area as the atmospheric pressure plummeted. In the observation room, the meteorological sensors went haywire, sirens blaring. What in the world? One of the teachers exclaimed. Is there a sudden storm system moving in? Aizawa's eyes were wide, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. That's not a storm system, he breathed, his voice laced with disbelief. That's him. On the main screen, Izuku stood as the epicenter of the impossible weather. The light dimmed as his personal thunderhead blotted out the sun, his green-black hair whipped around his face, and his eyes began to glow with a brilliant, electric blue light. A low, guttural rumble of thunder rolled directly overhead, a sound that was not a random act of nature, but a direct response to his will. Arcs of white lightning, no longer small and controlled, began to dance over his body, a crackling shroud of raw power. He wasn't drawing energy from the storm. He was the storm. He took a deep breath, and it felt like he was inhaling the very atmosphere. He raised his right arm, not in a punch, but pointing a single, steady finger toward the heavens. It was a gesture of command, a summons. What is he doing? Uraraka whispered from the ground, her pain forgotten as she stared in terrified awe. The zero-pointer, its programming focused on being a simple, destructive obstacle, registered Izuku as a target. Its single red eye locked onto him. It raised its city-block-sized fist to crush the insignificant boy who dared to stand against it. Izuku's glowing eyes shifted from the sky to the robot. The ancient instinct inside him, the will of a forgotten god, rose to the surface. It demanded tribute. It demanded prostration. And this lumbering machine of steel and wire was an affront. He brought his arm down in a swift, commanding arc, his finger now pointing directly at the zero-pointer's head. The heavens answered his call. From the heart of the swirling vortex above, a light brighter than the sun erupted. It was not a forked, chaotic bolt of lightning. It was a perfect, solid pillar of celestial fury, a spear of blinding white and gold hurled from the heavens by an unseen hand. It descended with a sound that ripped through the world, not a boom of thunder, but the deafening shriek of the sky itself tearing open. The bolt struck the zero-pointer directly in its head. The result was not an explosion. It was annihilation. For a single, silent, frame-frozen moment, the robot's entire internal structure was visible, a skeletal silhouette against the impossible brightness. Then, the terajoules of energy flash-cooked it from the inside out. The metal didn't just melt, it vaporized. The complex inner workings were turned to slag and steam. The entire colossal machine, all several hundred tons of it, was instantly and utterly fried. Its red eye went dark. Its limbs seized. For a second, it stood motionless, a silent, smoking monolith. Then, with a groaning screech of tortured metal, it began to fall, not forward onto Uraraka, but backward, away from the source of the divine punishment. It crashed into a line of buildings, sending up a plume of dust and debris that rose to meet the dissipating storm clouds. And then, there was silence. A profound, absolute silence that was heavier and more shocking than any sound. The panicked students had stopped in their tracks, their faces turned back toward the scene, their expressions a mixture of slack-jawed disbelief and primal fear. In the center of it all stood Izuku. The glow in his eyes faded. The lightning receded into his skin. The sky above returned to a peaceful blue, the unnatural storm gone as quickly as it had appeared. He stood for a moment, breathing heavily, the sheer output of power leaving him drained. Then he turned and sprinted to Uraraka, the adrenaline the only thing keeping him on his feet. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice returning to its normal, concerned tone as he began assessing the slab of concrete pinning her. She could only stare up at him, her eyes wide with an awe so total it bordered on religious reverence. A deafening buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. In the observation room, no one spoke. The heroes, the principal, the seasoned veterans who thought they had seen everything the world of quirks had to offer, were utterly speechless. They stared at the main screen, which now showed a smoking, decapitated crater where the zero-pointer's head used to be, and the small, unassuming boy helping a fellow examinee. Aizawa finally broke the silence, his voice a dry, rasping whisper. "Nizu!" "What was that?" Nizu's usual cheerful demeanor was gone, replaced by an expression of intense, calculating seriousness. His paws were steepled before him, his gaze fixed on Izuku's file on a nearby monitor. "I do not know," the principal said softly. "His file says he has an electrical quirk registered as Atmos. But what we just witnessed was not a quirk." That was something else entirely. All Might let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The sledgehammer. I may have underestimated the size of it. The final scores began to flash up on the board. First place, Izuku Midoriya. Villain points, 77. Rescue points, 60. Total, 137. It was a score so impossibly high it broke the system, an unprecedented achievement. But no one was looking at the number. They were all looking at the name next to it, and they were all thinking the same thing. A storm had just arrived at UA High School, and the forecast for the future of Hero Society had just become completely, terrifyingly, unpredictable. The first day at UA High was an exercise in controlled chaos. The hallways were a river of unfamiliar faces, a vibrant, noisy tapestry of nervous energy, boisterous confidence, and every mutation imaginable. For Izuku Midoriya, it was like standing in the heart of a city he had only ever viewed from a distance. 10 months ago, this environment would have swallowed him whole. He would have been a ghost haunting the edges of the crowd, his shoulders hunched, his eyes downcast, a walking apology for his own existence. Today, he walked with his head held high. He wasn't arrogant, nor was he loud. Instead, he possessed a stillness, a centered calm that was more profound than any boast. The chaotic bioelectric fields of hundreds of anxious teenagers washed over him, but they couldn't penetrate the quiet, steady hum of the storm within. He was the eye of a hurricane walking through a collection of scattered breezes. He found his classroom, 1A, the door comically oversized. Taking a quiet breath, he slid it open and stepped inside. A few students were already there. He immediately recognized the stern, well-postured boy from the exam entrance, Ida Tenya, who was already seated perfectly upright, his hands placed flat on his desk. He also saw Katsuki Bakugo, feet propped up on his desk in a flagrant violation of the rules, his expression a thunderous scowl. When Bakugo's crimson eyes met his, they didn't hold their usual dismissive contempt. They held a raw, burning confusion, a silent, furious question, "What are you?" Izuku offered a simple, neutral nod, a gesture that seemed to infuriate Bakugo even more. He chose a seat near the back by the window, the same spot he'd always favored. It afforded him a view of both the classroom and the sky. The familiar comfort of the clouds was a welcome anchor in this new, unpredictable sea. More students trickled in. He saw the friendly, brown-haired girl from the exam, Uraraka Achiko, and she gave him a bright, relieved wave, which he returned with a small smile. A boy with explosive red hair and pointed teeth grinned at the whole room. A girl with pink skin and antennae-like horns bounced on the balls of her feet, and in the back corner, a boy with heterochromatic red and white hair sat in stoic silence, a frosty aura of detachment around him. His gaze flickered to Izuku for a moment, analytical and cold, before dismissing him. The casual chatter and introductions were cut short when a new voice, monotone and utterly devoid of energy, spoke from the floor by the door. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave." Everyone turned. Lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag, looking like a disheveled caterpillar, was a man with tired, bloodshot eyes and a scruffy beard. He took a long slurp from a juice pouch before unzipping himself and standing up with a weary groan. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He ran a hand through his messy black hair. "That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. You can't afford to waste it." He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on each student for a fraction of a second before moving on. "I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher." The collective shock in the room was palpable. This exhausted-looking man was a pro-hero and their teacher? Aizawa pulled a blue gym uniform out of his sleeping bag. "Right. Get changed into these. Immediately. Then meet me on the P grounds." He gave no further explanation, simply turning and walking out, leaving behind a classroom of bewildered teenagers. On the grounds, the sun was bright, the air crisp. Class 1A stood in a loose formation, clad in their new uniforms, a mixture of excitement and confusion on their faces. "A quirk apprehension test?" the class exclaimed in unison. "But what about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation?" Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed. "We don't have time for pointless pleasantries," Aizawa stated flatly, his back to them. "The hero course is a full-time job. You need to hit the ground running. He turned, his gaze sweeping over them, dark and serious. You've all been doing these standardized physical tests since middle school. But you were never allowed to use your quirks. That's not rational. The ministry that dictates these things is run by stale, unimaginative bureaucrats. He tossed a softball to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam for the entrance test. What was your farthest throw in middle school? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Right. Now try it with your quirk. Do whatever you want, just stay in the circle. Bakugo grinned, a feral, predatory expression. He stretched his arms, a familiar sadistic glee in his eyes. He wound up, and as his arm came forward, a massive explosion erupted from his palm. Die! He screamed, the word echoing across the field. The ball rocketed into the sky, a smoking comet propelled by pure, unadulterated aggression. It sailed on and on, a tiny speck against the brilliant blue, before finally falling back to Earth. Aizawa held up a small device. A digital number glowed on its screen. 705.2 meters, the class erupted. Whoa! 705 meters? That's insane! This looks like fun! Izuku watched, his expression unreadable. He analyzed the physics of it, the explosive force, the angle of trajectory. It was impressive, a perfect application of a powerful quirk. He felt the familiar tingle of admiration for Kaken's raw talent, but it was no longer followed by the gut-wrenching pang of envy. It was simply data. Fun? Aizawa's voice was suddenly cold, all traces of indifference gone. You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Idiots! A dark, unnerving smile spread across his face. Today, you will be competing in 8 physical tests to gauge your potential. The person who ranks last in total results will be judged to have no potential and will be immediately expelled. Panic ripped through the class. Expelled? But it's the first day. That's not fair. Not fair? Aizawa countered, his hair beginning to float slightly around his head, a sign of his own quirk's activation. Natural disasters are not fair. Catastrophic villain attacks are not fair. A world where power is everything is not fair. It's a hero's job to fight against that unfairness. If you were expecting a fun-filled 3 years at school, you're in the wrong place. For the next 3 years, you will push you to your limits. We will put you through one hardship after another. This is plus ultra. Overcome these challenges, or you don't belong here. His gaze settled on the class, each student shrinking under its weight. This was no idle threat. This was a promise. The fun was over. Izuku felt a surge, not of fear, but of determination. A test. A challenge. This was what he had been preparing for. He had spent 10 months learning to carry the weight of the heavens. He could certainly handle the pressure of a single teacher. Test 1, 50-meter dash. The first pairing was Ida Tenya against a frog-like girl named Tsuyu Azui. Ida crouched at the starting line, the specialized engines in his calves hissing. When the starting pistol fired, he exploded forward, covering the distance in a staggering 3.04 seconds. Impressive! Izuku murmured, making a mental note of the engine's output and gear system. Next, it was his turn. He was paired with Uraraka. She looked at him, her expression a little grim. Last place gets expelled. This is nerve-wracking. Just do your best, Izuku said, giving her a reassuring smile before turning his attention to the track. He walked to the starting line. He didn't crouch. He simply stood, his posture relaxed. Aizawa watched him, his eyes narrowed. Midoriya, your file is interesting. It says your quirk only manifested 10 months ago. Let's see what it can do. What is your quirk called? Aizawa asked, his tone demanding. Izuku met his teacher's gaze. I call it Atmos. The name meant nothing to Aizawa. It was vague, uninformative. He clicked his stopwatch, his skepticism palpable. The starting pistol fired. For a split second, Izuku remained perfectly still. Then he vanished. It wasn't a run. It wasn't a blur of motion. One moment he was at the starting line, and the next he was at the finish, a trail of shimmering, ionized air hanging behind him like an afterimage. A sharp crack echoed across the field, the sound of air rushing back into the vacuum his passage had created. The automated sensor at the finish line beeped. Aizawa stared at his stopwatch, his thumbs still hovering over the button. The device in his hand was useless. He looked at the sensor's reading, 0.09 seconds. The sound of a dozen jaws hitting the pavement was almost audible. Ida's glasses nearly fell off his face. Bakugo's eyes were wide with a furious, disbelieving rage. How? Uraraka stammered from the starting line. She hadn't even had time to take a step. I ionized a path of air between the start and finish lines, then discharged a small amount of my body's latent electrical energy to travel along it. Izuku explained calmly, as if describing how to tie a shoe. It's more efficient than running. Aizawa just stared at him, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, simply jotting down the impossible number on his clipboard. Atmos, he calls it? More like a teleportation quirk. But the energy signature, it's electrical. The boy's file was becoming more of a puzzle by the second. Test 2, grip strength. Izuku watched as a large, multi-armed student named Mizo Shoji recorded a massive 540 kilograms. When it was his turn, Izuku took the device. He could have crushed it into a diamond using an intense electromagnetic field, but what was the point? Restraint. He focused, channeling a small, steady current into his hand, using the resulting magnetic field to augment his muscle contraction. The device clicked. 120 kilograms. A respectable, strong score, but not superhuman. Not a record breaker. He saw a flicker of relief on the faces of some of his classmates. Maybe the dash was a one-trick pony quirk. Test 3-4. Standing long jump repeated sidesteps. In the long jump, he cleared the sandbox entirely, using a controlled burst of ionized air beneath his feet to propel himself. In the sidesteps, he was a phantom, a blur of blue and white, his movements so fast and fluid they were barely perceptible. More impossible scores. More stunned silence. The initial relief his classmates had felt was replaced by a growing sense of awe and a healthy dose of fear. This wasn't just a powerful student. This was something on another level entirely. Test 5, the ball throw. This was the main event. It was the test where raw, quantifiable power could be displayed for all to see. Bakugo had already set the bar with his 705 meters. Uraraka surprised everyone by touching the ball, activating her zero-gravity quirk, and throwing it. It sailed up and up, never coming down. The device beeped, an infinity symbol. Infinity? The class shouted. Aizawa looked unimpressed. Logical. Finally, it was Izuku's turn. He walked into the circle, the same softball from middle school now feeling alien in his hand. He could feel the small iron particles within the ball's core, could sense the metallic dust in the soil beneath his feet. He could feel the Earth's magnetic field, a vast, invisible web stretching out around him. He took a deep breath, quieting his mind. The scalpel, not the sledgehammer. He didn't need an explosion. He didn't need brute force. He needed physics. He held the ball aloft. He didn't wind up. He simply stood, his eyes glowing with that now familiar blue light. A low hum filled the air, the sound of immense power being drawn and focused. He wasn't just channeling his own energy. He was tapping into the world around him. He created a powerful electromagnetic field, polarizing the ball and turning the space directly in front of him into a miniature railgun. What's he doing? Someone whispered. He's just standing there. Bakugo watched, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He knew. He had seen that glow before. He knew that this wasn't Deku. Not the Deku he knew. Izuku's arm snapped forward. There was no explosion, no grand display. Just a sharp, clean thump and a high-pitched, resonant whine that lasted for less than a second. The ball vanished. It didn't fly. It was simply gone. One moment it was in his hand, the next, it was not. There was no arc, no trail of smoke. Just an empty space where the ball used to be. Everyone stared into the empty sky, waiting. And waiting. It never came down. Aizawa looked at his device, his brow furrowed. The numbers were still climbing at an impossible rate. 10 kilometers. 50, 100. Then the screen flickered and displayed a single, glaring word in red. Error. Silence. A profound, world-breaking silence. Error? A student with yellow hair and a black lightning bolt in it squeaked. What does that mean? Did he break it? It means the ball has exceeded the device's maximum tracking range, Aizawa said, his voice a low monotone, but his eyes were wide with a shock he couldn't conceal. It has likely achieved low Earth orbit. He looked at Izuku, who was standing calmly in the circle, the blue glow fading from his eyes. Midoriya. Explain. I created a linear electromagnetic accelerator using the iron particles in the ball as a projectile, Izuku stated simply. The launch velocity was approximately 7.9 kilometers per second. It should stabilize in orbit for a few years before its trajectory decays. The class stared at him as if he had just started speaking an alien language. It wasn't just the power that was terrifying. It was the intelligence behind it. The casual, clinical explanation of an act that defied all known applications of a quirk. Todoroki, who had remained silent and aloof until now, watched Izuku with a newfound intensity. His own power was immense, a legacy of fire and ice. But this felt different. It felt fundamental, like someone was rewriting the laws of physics on a whim. Aizawa's mind was racing. Electromagnetic acceleration, ionization, teleportation-like speed. He calls it atmos, relating to air, but he's demonstrating high-level control over the entire electromagnetic spectrum. The manifestation was recent and triggered by extreme stress. The power levels are off the charts, yet his control is surgical. This doesn't add up. None of it adds up. The rest of the tests passed in a blur. Izuku continued to excel, though he deliberately held back on some, not wanting to break every single piece of equipment. He didn't need to. The message had been sent. The gauntlet had been thrown down. He finished first in the overall rankings. In last place was a short, purple-haired boy named Minoru Mineta, who was now sobbing on the ground. By the way, Aizawa said, his voice dripping with bored nonchalance. The expulsion threat was a lie. The class, except for a knowing girl with a black ponytail, stared in shock. It was a rational deception, Aizawa continued. Designed to push you to your limits. He turned to leave, the tests concluded. But his gaze fell on Izuku one last time. The final, most important test was yet to come. It would be a private one. As the class was heading back to the locker rooms, buzzing with relief and chattering about Izuku's monstrous power, Aizawa's voice cut through the air. Midoriya! Stay behind. The other students scurried away, not wanting to be caught in the orbit of whatever was about to happen. Izuku stood alone on the field, facing his teacher. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple. Aizawa's demeanor had changed completely. The tired teacher persona was gone. In its place was the grim, focused intensity of the pro-hero, Eraserhead. We're going to do one more test, Aizawa said, his scarf beginning to float around him, his eyes glowing a faint, menacing red. A simple one. A 100-meter dash. Run it as you did the first one. Go, Izuku nodded. He turned to face the track, focusing his mind, preparing to ionize the air. He gathered his energy, the familiar hum building within him, and then he felt it, a strange, invasive pressure. It wasn't physical. It felt like someone was trying to snip a wire inside his soul, a wire that didn't exist. It was the sensation of Aizawa's quirk, erasure, trying to find his quirk factor and nullify it. But it found nothing. Izuku's hum of internal power didn't flicker. The faint static charge in the air around him didn't dissipate. He turned back to Aizawa, his own eyes beginning to glow with their telltale blue light, a stark contrast to Aizawa's crimson glare. Aizawa was visibly shaken. This was the first time in his entire heroic career that his quirk had ever failed. He was staring at an impossibility. His power was absolute. It erased quirks. It didn't matter how strong or complex. If it was a power derived from a quirk factor, he could turn it off. The fact that Izuku's power remained active meant only one thing. It didn't work. Izuku stated, not as a question, but as an observation. Aizawa's eyes narrowed, his hair settling back down as he deactivated his power, the strain showing on his face. He took a step closer, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Don't play games with me, kid. I've seen quirks of every shape and size. I've seen power that can level cities. But they all have one thing in common: they can be erased. Yours can't. So I'll ask you one more time. What? Are you? The question was no longer about a quirk. It was about his very nature, his existence. Izuku looked his teacher in the eye, the setting sun glinting off Aizawa's goggles. He thought about Toshinori's warning, that his power would attract attention, that it would raise questions no one could answer. He decided, in that moment, that the truth, or at least a part of it, was the only logical path forward. I told you what I call it, Izuku said, his voice steady. But you're right. My power, the energy I use, it's not connected to the quirk factor. He took a breath, delivering the line that would forever define him in his teacher's eyes. I don't think it's a quirk. The words hung in the twilight air between them, simple, sincere, and utterly world-shattering. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't a lie. It was a confession. Aizawa stared at him for a long, silent minute. He searched the boy's face for any sign of deception, any hint of arrogance. He found none. He only saw a quiet, earnest kid who was stating a fact as he understood it. A fact that broke every rule of biology and society that Aizawa knew. A person with a superpower that wasn't a quirk, a god among mortals. The mystery of Izuku Midoriya had just deepened tenfold. He was no longer just a promising student with an overpowered ability. He was an anomaly. A variable that could not be calculated. A target. And as his new homeroom teacher, he was now Shota Aizawa's #1 problem. Get to the locker room, Aizawa said finally, his voice strained. He turned his back on Izuku, a clear dismissal. Don't be late for class tomorrow. As Izuku walked away, the weight of his teacher's stare felt heavier than any of the physical tests. He had passed, and in doing so, had proven himself to be something other. He had shown them a spark of the storm. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they would all be watching, waiting for the lightning to strike again. The shift from the monotonous gray of Shota Aizawa's pragmatism to the brilliant, primary-colored world of All Might was like stepping from a black and white film into glorious technicolor. The afternoon's hero basic training was heralded by the man himself, who burst into the classroom not through the door, but from around a corner, his iconic V-shaped hair antennae preceding him. I am coming through the door like a normal person, he boomed, his voice a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated optimism. The classroom, still subdued from Aizawa's grueling test and expulsion threat, erupted into a chorus of excited chatter. This was it. The real deal. Learning from the #1 hero himself. Welcome to the most important class at UA High. Think of it as Hero ING 101, All Might declared, striking a pose that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Here, you will learn the basics of being a pro, and what it means to fight for the greater good. And for our first lesson, we'll be jumping right into this. He held up a card with the word battle emblazoned across it in bold, red letters. A palpable jolt of energy shot through the students. Bakugo's lips curled into a feral grin. Izuku felt the familiar hum within him quicken its tempo, a low thrum of anticipation. And to go with your first battle, All Might continued, pressing a button on a remote. You'll need these. From the wall, sleek metal cases slid out, each numbered according to a student's seat. Your costumes, based on your quirk registration forms and the designs you submitted before school started. Get changed, and meet me at ground beta. The locker room was a cacophony of excited shouts as his classmates discovered their new gear. Izuku found his case, number 18, and opened it with a sense of reverent nervousness. Inside was the costume he had sketched 100 times, brought to life. It was a deep, forest green jumpsuit, a shade reminiscent of his own hair, made from a thick, durable, yet flexible material his mother had insisted would be comfortable. It featured white accents, sturdy black boots, and thick, protective elbow and knee pads. He had made a few modifications to his original, more All Might-inspired design. The oversized smile on the respirator mask was gone, replaced by a simple, functional metal guard. The long, floppy ears of the hood were shorter, more streamlined, housing a communications system. Most importantly, at Toshinori's suggestion, the soles of his boots and the palms of his gloves were subtly integrated with a network of copper filaments, designed to help him ground himself and dissipate excess electrical charge safely. It wasn't flashy. It was practical, humble, and a testament to his journey. It was his. When he emerged into the sunlight of ground beta with his classmates, it was like a comic book panel had sprung to life. Everyone looked powerful, heroic. Ida's full-body armor made him look like a futuristic knight. Uraraka's sleek, pink and black suit was both cute and functional. And then there was Bakugo. His costume was pure aggression, a black, sleeveless top, baggy pants, and massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets on his arms. It was a perfect reflection of his personality, loud, intimidating, and designed for maximum destruction. All Might surveyed them with a proud grin. They say the clothes make the hero, and you all look the part. You look like the next generation of greatness, he explained the exercise. It was an indoor, 2-on-2 battle simulation. One team would be designated as villains, tasked with guarding a fake nuclear weapon hidden within a building. The other team, the heroes, would have a time limit to either capture the villains with special tape or secure the weapon. This is a scenario where the villains have hidden a bomb in their lair. A classic trope. All Might explained. The situation is critical, the stakes are high, and your teamwork will be the key to success. He held up a lottery box. Your partners and opponents will be decided by drawing lots. One by one, the teams were formed. Aoyama and Ishido. Shoji and Todoroki. And then, Team A will be these two. All Might announced, holding up the balls. Midoriya Izuku and Uraraka Achiko. Izuku looked over at Uraraka, who gave him a thumbs up and a determined smile. He felt a sense of relief. Her straightforward, positive energy was a welcome anchor. And their opponents will be Team D. The balls in All Might's hand read Bakugo Katsuki and Ida Tenya. A silence fell over the group. The air, which had been buzzing with excitement, suddenly became heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Every eye in the class turned to Izuku and Bakugo. This wasn't just a training exercise anymore. This was a reckoning. Izuku met Bakugo's gaze across the training ground. Bakugo's crimson eyes were narrowed into slits, burning with an intensity that went far beyond simple rivalry. It was a look of profound, furious betrayal. The muscles in his jaw were clenched so tight they looked like they might snap. In his eyes, Izuku saw the ghost of every insult, every explosion, every moment of torment, all of it now twisted and warped by a singular, consuming question. How could you? He thinks I was hiding this from him, Izuku realized with a sinking heart. He thinks my entire life, my admiration, my fear, was all a lie. An act to mock him. Team A will be the heroes, and Team D will be the villains. All Might's voice boomed, breaking the spell. Everyone else, head to the monitor room. Villains, you'll have 5 minutes to prepare inside. Then the heroes will storm the castle. As they walked toward the building, Uraraka looked at Izuku, her usual cheerful expression replaced with one of concern. Wow, talk about intense. You and Bakugo, you guys have history, don't you? We grew up together, Izuku said, his voice quiet. He looked at his gloved hands, clenching and unclenching them. Things got complicated. Well, he seems really angry, she said, an understatement of colossal proportions. We need a plan. He's definitely going to come right for you. Izuku nodded, his analytical mind kicking into gear, pushing aside the emotional turmoil. Uraraka was right. This was a mission, not a personal feud. You're right. Kaken is impulsive and incredibly aggressive. He'll abandon the objective to fight me. Ida, on the other hand, is the opposite. He's logical, precise, and will take his role as a guard seriously. He'll stay with the weapon. He unrolled the building's blueprints All Might had provided. They'll most likely place the bomb on one of the upper floors to create a defensive choke point. Our best strategy is to treat this as 2 separate battles. I'll engage Kaken and keep him occupied. He's too dangerous to ignore, and he won't let me get past him anyway. While I have him distracted, you'll use your quirk to bypass the fighting and find the weapon. Ida won't be expecting a threat from above. Uraraka's eyes widened. You want to take him on by yourself? But his explosions, And after seeing your power at the apprehension test, won't you two just destroy the whole building? Izuku looked up from the blueprints, his gaze steady and serious. I'm not going to fight him, Uraraka-san. I'm going to contain him. There's a difference. In the monitor room, the rest of Class 1A watched the screens, the tension palpable. Man, this is gonna be brutal, said a boy with red, spiky hair named Kirishima. Bakugo looks like he's ready to kill someone, and Midoriya, added Kaminari, the electric-type quirk user. We all saw what he did yesterday. If he unleashes anything like that ball throw in there, the building's toast. Todoroki watched in silence, his expression cold and analytical. He wasn't interested in the personal drama. He was interested in the power. Bakugo was a blunt instrument of immense destructive capability. Midoriya, however, was a puzzle. A being of overwhelming power who wielded it with the precision of a surgeon. This battle would reveal which philosophy was superior. Inside the building, on the 5th floor, Ida was meticulously clearing the room of any debris. Bakugo-kun, we must formulate a strategy. The hero team will likely attempt a frontal assault, if we anticipate their path. Shut up, Four Eyes, Bakugo snarled, staring at the door. He wasn't listening. He was a predator waiting for his prey. The only one I care about is Deku. That damn nerd has been hiding this from me his entire life. Looking down on me. Laughing at me behind my back. He slammed a fist into his palm, a sharp explosion punctuating his words. Today, I'm going to make him show it all. I'm going to beat him so badly he'll never look down on me again. The buzzer sounded. The hero team was in. Izuku and Uraraka entered through a ground floor window, their movements silent and fluid. Izuku immediately closed his eyes, extending his senses. He couldn't see the others, but he could feel them. He could feel the faint bioelectric signature of two bodies on the 5th floor. More than that, he could feel the complex web of the building's electrical grid, the power lines in the walls, the servers in the communication rooms, the fluorescent lights overhead. The entire building was a part of his domain. They're on the 5th floor, northeast corner, Izuku whispered, pointing upward. Just as we thought. Ida is stationary, guarding the objective. Kaken is on the move. He's coming. Before Uraraka could even ask how he knew, a deafening explosion ripped through the hallway to their left. Bakugo came rocketing around the corner, propelled by his blasts, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Deku! He roared, his voice a guttural howl. I've found you, you lying bastard! He thrust his right palm forward, unleashing a massive, wide-arc explosion designed to immolate the entire corridor. Izuku reacted with inhuman speed. Go! He yelled at Uraraka, pushing her toward a stairwell. In the same motion, he slapped both hands on the metal walls of the corridor. A shimmering, translucent shield of crackling static electricity erupted in front of him, just as Bakugo's explosion hit. The blast washed over the shield, the concussive force and searing heat dissipating against the humming energy field. The wallpaper on the walls peeled and burned, but the shield held. When the fire cleared, Izuku stood untouched, his eyes glowing a soft, warning blue. Bakugo stared, his rage momentarily eclipsed by shock. A shield? Cute trick. Kaken, stop this, Izuku said, his voice calm but firm. This is a training exercise. I'm not going to fight you. Not going to fight me? Bakugo's laughter was a harsh, broken sound. You think you're so far above me now you don't even have to try? You've been looking down on me all this time. He blasted forward again, his movements erratic and powerful. Thus began the dance. It was a brutal, one-sided assault met with a graceful, untouchable defense. Bakugo was a hurricane, smashing through walls, his explosions tearing craters in the concrete floor. Izuku was the wind itself, flowing around him. He used his lightning-quick dashes to maintain distance, the sharp crack of displaced air his only calling card. He never threw a single punch, never unleashed a single blast of his own. His strategy was one of control and misdirection. As Bakugo charged, Izuku would magnetize a section of the steel-reinforced wall, causing Bakugo's trajectory to veer off just enough for him to miss. He pulled metal debris from the ceiling to form impromptu barriers, which Bakugo would promptly annihilate, wasting time and energy. Stand and fight me, coward! Bakugo screamed, his frustration mounting with every failed attack. He was landing blows on nothing but air and rubble. My objective is the weapon, Kaken. Not you, Izuku said, his voice echoing from down a different hallway. He was using the building structure to his advantage, leading Bakugo on a wild goose chase through the labyrinthine corridors. In the monitor room, the students were captivated. Holy crap! Kirishima breathed. Midoriya isn't even fighting back, and he's totally dominating the fight. It's a battle of attrition. Yayorozu, the girl with the creation quirk, analyzed. Bakugo relies on overwhelming force, but his stamina is finite. Midoriya is expending almost no energy, simply redirecting Bakugo's own momentum. It's an incredibly intelligent strategy. All Might watched, a bead of sweat on his brow. He was proud of Izuku's restraint, his adherence to the lessons they had practiced. But he also saw the escalating rage in young Bakugo. A cornered animal was at its most dangerous. Meanwhile, Uraraka was making her way up the building, her movements quiet and stealthy. Thanks to Izuku's distraction, she had encountered no resistance. She reached the 5th floor and peeked around a corner. There, in the center of the room, stood Ida, guarding the papier-mâché bomb, his posture perfect. Aha! I knew you would come! Ida declared, having spotted her. Your partner is a formidable distraction, but I, Ida Tenya, will not be so easily fooled. As the villain, I shall protect this weapon with my life. Mwahaha! His attempt at a villainous laugh was stiff and awkward, but his resolve was absolute. He had cleared the room of all debris, giving Uraraka nothing to use her quirk on except for him and the bomb, a major tactical advantage. The two of them began a careful, strategic standoff. Back on the 3rd floor, the battle between Thunder and Nitro reached its boiling point. Bakugo was panting, his black top soaked with sweat. The constant explosions were taking a toll, but his rage was a fuel that burned hotter than any fatigue. I get it now, he snarled, a terrifying, calculating glint in his eyes. You're not fighting me because you think you've already won. You've been planning this, haven't you? You and that round-faced girl. This is all just a game to you. Izuku appeared at the end of the hall, his posture still relaxed, but his glowing eyes betrayed his intense focus. It's a training exercise, Kaken. That's the point. You know how my quirk works, you damn nerd, Bakugo said, raising his massive gauntlets. You've been scribbling about it in those creepy notebooks your whole life. You know I secrete nitroglycerin like sweat, and I can ignite it from my palms. He tapped the side of one of the gauntlets. These aren't just for show. They've been storing all my sweat from this entire fight. A small pin was visible near the gauntlet's handle. Bakugo hooked his finger around it. In the monitor room, All Might's eyes widened in horror. Young Bakugo, don't! You'll kill him! If I don't hit him, he won't die! Bakugo screamed back, his voice raw and ragged, clearly audible over the comms. He pulled the pin. The entire side of the gauntlet opened, and an unbelievable amount of stored nitroglycerin was unleashed in a single, focused blast. It was not an explosion, it was an inferno. A colossal, building-wide beam of destructive energy shot down the hallway, incinerating everything in its path. Izuku's eyes widened. This was beyond containment. This was annihilation. The sheer scale of the blast was too large for a simple static shield. He had a split second to make a choice. He could try to absorb it, risking catastrophic overload. He could try to redirect it, potentially bringing the entire building down on top of everyone. Or, he chose a third option. An option born from the storm. As the wall of fire roared toward him, Izuku slammed his foot on the ground. He didn't erect a shield in front of him. He changed the very environment around him. He drew on the ambient thermal energy in the air, causing the temperature in the corridor to plummet by 50 degrees in an instant. The moisture in the air flash condensed, not into a simple mist, but into a swirling, turbulent vortex of supercooled fog. A miniature thunderhead, born in the confines of a concrete hallway. The fire from Bakugo's blast hit the dense, icy fog. The massive temperature differential created a violent reaction. Steam exploded outwards, and the fire, robbed of its concentrated heat and oxygen, was significantly weakened, its focus diffused. But it was still coming. Izuku stood in the heart of his personal storm, the cold fog clinging to his suit. He raised his hand, not against the blast, but toward the ceiling. The ancient instinct within him took over, his mind performing a million calculations in a nanosecond. He saw the path. He saw the target. A single, brilliant white spear of lightning, no thicker than his arm, erupted from his palm. It didn't strike the oncoming fire. It shot upward, piercing the concrete ceiling. It traveled through the building's infrastructure, following the path of rebar and electrical wiring with impossible precision, a guided missile of pure energy. On the 5th floor, Ida was closing in on Uraraka when a brilliant flash of light erupted from the wall near Bakugo, who was bracing himself against the recoil of his own attack. The bolt of lightning, having traveled 2 floors in a microsecond, struck the back of Bakugo's left gauntlet. There was no grand explosion. Just a sharp, percussive crack and a shower of blue sparks. The complex firing mechanism within the gauntlet was instantly fried. The metal casing glowed cherry red for a moment before turning black, smoke pouring from its joints. The flow of nitroglycerin for his ultimate attack was cut off. The inferno in the 3rd floor hallway, its source severed, sputtered and died just feet from where Izuku stood, leaving behind a scorched, blackened corridor filled with steam and the acrid smell of burnt electronics. Bakugo stared at his smoking, useless gauntlet, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. He had unleashed his ultimate move, a blast that should have leveled half the building, and Deku had neutralized it without even touching it. He had somehow reached through the very building to disarm him. How? Bakugo whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and for the first time, genuine fear. What the hell are you? Before Izuku could answer, a voice crackled over the comms. It was Uraraka. I got it! Touch the weapon! While Bakugo was reeling from the shock, Uraraka had seized the opportunity. She had leaped over Ida, using her quirk on herself to float, and slapped her hand down on the bomb. A loud buzzer echoed through the building. The hero team wins! All Might's voice declared, filled with a profound, shaky relief. The fight was over. Izuku's personal storm dissipated, the fog evaporating, the temperature returning to normal. The blue glow in his eyes faded, leaving behind his gentle, tired green. The sheer focus and control he had exerted left him feeling drained, but he was standing. He was unharmed. He walked slowly down the scorched hallway toward Bakugo, who was still on his knees, staring at his ruined gauntlet. It's over, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice soft. He held out the roll of capture tape. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a deep, weary sadness. He had won the exercise. He had proven his point, but looking at the shattered expression on his childhood friend's face, it felt like a profound loss. In the monitor room, there was a stunned, absolute silence. No one knew what to say. They had just witnessed a battle that redefined what they thought was possible. Kirishima finally broke the silence, his voice hushed with awe. He didn't just dodge it. He disarmed him, through 2 floors of concrete, without even looking. Todoroki's fists were clenched at his sides. He had watched Izuku meet a city block leveling explosion not with equal or greater force, but with tactics, environmental control, and a single, surgical strike of impossible precision. It was a display of power so refined, so controlled, it made his own immense abilities feel clumsy and brutish by comparison. This wasn't a rival. This was a benchmark. A living, breathing example of a level of mastery he hadn't even known existed. All Might let out a long, slow breath, his giant smile gone, replaced by an expression of profound gravity. He looked at the screen, at the small, unassuming boy who had just tamed an explosion with a thunderstorm, and felt a shiver of something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. It was the feeling of looking at something truly, incomprehensibly vast. Izuku hadn't just proven his power was controllable. He had proven that his definition of control was on a level that was, for all intents and purposes, godlike. The scalpel had just performed surgery on a nuclear bomb.